Good evening, everybody. We're at about 6:31, and so I'm still seeing a few people come in and out, but I'd like to get this underway because I know how busy everybody is at this time of the year, and particularly around club season. So first of all, I'd like to start by introducing myself. My name's Emma Gibbons, and I am the Chief Executive Officer of Volleyball BC, and I am very, very excited to be hosting you at this exciting webinar this evening. And I would like to just start by acknowledging that I'm coming to you today from the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Squamish First Nation. And we are the provincial governing body, so we're very fortunate to play and enjoy these lands throughout the province. But our head offices are based in Burnaby, and those are the traditional territories that we are based on. I also wanted to start by saying this is the first of at least three webinars that we are going to be delivering on various topics that relate to mental health and well-being around this club season. And it's the culmination really of some work that we've been doing over the last couple of years. We realized coming out of the pandemic how important the mental health component was around sport, and for volleyball was no exception in this area. And so we have been working as an organization really hard to understand how we can ensure that all of the programs and all of the activities and services that we offer really help to support that component of an individual's development. I think, sport always very much focuses on achievements in a physical sense, and everybody's technical and tactical expertise, but we're really trying to shift that focus and make sure that we are putting in place resources to help support the social, the emotional, and the mental development of individuals at the same time. So last year, I hope that some of you might have seen this, but we launched a mental health toolkit, which was a set of resources that we were really hoping that our local clubs and volleyball programs can take and use to help implement and center mental wellness and at the heart of everything that they do. And as part of that, we asked our members what was important to them, or some of the areas that they felt that they wanted additional resources. And so the topics that we've picked for these three webinars have come out of that research and come out of what you told us were some of the areas that you felt that you wanted more support or that you were interested in learning more. So the topic tonight, which we deliberately chose to be in January, is around creating positive team dynamics, because as we know, like, teams get formed and put together very fast and are expected to perform at a really high level very quickly for the club season. And that can cause stressful situations. And so we're very excited to kick it off tonight by talking about how we can try and address some of these dynamics. So a couple of areas of housekeeping before I transition on. The first is that this session is being recorded, and we will be sharing a copy of the recording with you after this. The second one is that we would love it if you could ask questions. So please feel free to put something in the Q&A or in the chat. Hopefully we've enabled the Q&A, but I know sometimes the functionality isn't great. So when in doubt, put something in the chat, and there will be various points in the evening that we'll be able to stop and take some of those questions. So the next thing that I'm super excited to do is to introduce some of the people that you're going to be hearing from tonight. And one of the big things that we have been most excited about is that we have some mental health ambassadors. And these are individuals who probably are quite familiar to some of you, who've been around in the volleyball community for a while and really have so much to share with us about their own experiences, particularly around mental health and well-being. So joining us tonight is Kyla Richey, Shanice Marcelle, and Derek Thiessen, and they will be joining Shaunna, who I'm about to introduce, and contributing some of their experiences in a way that we hope that you'll be able to learn from and really hear from the athlete perspective as well. And so my final piece of introduction goes to Shaunna Taylor, who some of you may be familiar with because we have done a bit of a double act on a few of these before. Shaunna is a clinical psychologist. She is the past chair of the Canadian Sports Psychology Association, and she also sits on the UBC faculty. And as an additional challenge, she's the executive director of the Pacific Sport Interior or an Okanagan division, and works very hard in the Okanagan to support sport development as well. She's got a wealth of knowledge in this area, and she is going to be guiding us through the session this evening. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Shaunna, and we're going to get this thing going.
Awesome. Thanks, Emma. I'm really excited to be continuing on all the great work that we started last year, and so thrilled to have our ambassadors with us. It's going to be a great evening, and I think this is a really pertinent topic that there was a ton of uptake on and a lot of great questions sent to us in advance. So we tried to really address those in the content of the material we're about to present. Unlike you just announced, I'm in the Okanagan, so I have the privilege of living, playing, breathing the air, swimming in the water of the unceded traditional territory of the Syilx Nation. And I am just thrilled to be in partnership with our Indigenous communities, many of whom participate in the sport of volleyball as well. So this is a great honor for me in addition. The 4 areas that we're going to focus on tonight are on the screen here. So it's a massive field. If you think about building positive team dynamics, I mean, this could take weeks if we wanted to really dig in. So what we did is we took a look at some of the feedback from what Emma got with the outreach to all of the Volleyball BC membership, as well as some of the questions that were delivered via a survey tool in advance of signing up for this webinar. And so many of them, not all, but many of them fall under these 4 areas. And so we've decided to keep it fairly succinct and try to stick to these 4 themes tonight, but it doesn't mean that you can't ask a question that might not fit perfectly maybe in one of these boxes, and that's okay too. So we'd like to keep it as interactive as possible. If there's ever anything that one of the ambassadors or I am saying and it twinges something in you that you'd like to find out more about, then pop it up in the chat and we'll do our best to address it. We also wanted, because some of you might not have seen the toolkit already, I wanted to just make mention of the 6 different pillars that actually make up this approach to mental health and well-being across all of the different programs. And so as you can see, enhancing awareness and having ambassadors is a really important way of upskilling and maybe creating more buy-in from your clubs and from your community. So that's one of the important pillars. Culture change is what we're talking about tonight. We're talking about dynamics. We're talking about a changing sportscape and wanting to create more inclusive, well-being oriented, and mental health supporting team cultures. Positive communication is actually a sub point that we'll be weaving into tonight's theme as well. So we're kind of doing a 2-for-1, actually a 3-for-1, because we got ambassadors, culture change, and positive communication kind of all fit into this one. Fostering participation and how we can use volleyball as a way to connect and a way to build and a way to hopefully have healthier communities. And then the last 2, creating those really inclusive, welcoming, diverse, open-minded spaces where everyone feels safe, and building your network so you know what to do if you do spot a mental health issue or you want to be able to be preventative and maybe add education in your programs. So that's what the global, just if you're interested, I'd really encourage you to find out more about the materials and to use them, and to perhaps view the first webinar, which gives an instruction as to what these 6 pillars are all about. So back to developing these spaces and these cultures of inclusive and hopefully very positive outcomes. The first term that I'm hoping you'll take away, and for some of you this might be a new term, is creating psychological safety. And this often surprises people because it's not exactly what they're expecting in the way of definition. So psychological safety, put in other words that you could modify to make it more understandable to a younger person, for example, it means you can feel in that environment of psychological safety that you can speak up and you can contribute without fear of being humiliated or without fear of being reprimanded, or that your question is silly, or that it's a dumb question, having a concern isn't allowed, and especially that you're not allowed to make mistakes. That would not be in a psychologically safe environment. So it's that belief that you won't be punished or humiliated. You feel like your voice matters, and that the people around you that are creating that culture care about what you have to say and what you're currently feeling. So the way that we give those messages and create that culture and receive those messages benefit everybody. And so the more we can enhance the psychological safety, the better. There are lots of reasons, though, why in sport it can be tough. It can be really tough to create those psychologically safe spaces. And three, this is not an exclusive list and a totally inclusive list, but there are three key reasons why. Number one is that there's usually some kind of imbalance of power in all, hierarchical organizations or structures or institutions. There are people with power, more power, and those without. So the imbalance of power, for example, between a coach and maybe young athletes, that might be an imbalance of power that could enhance some of the difficulty in creating that safe space. Emotionally charged environments. Sport invokes a lot of passion, right? And a lot of emotion. And because of that, we see people sometimes operating on a totally different frequency than when they're away from the sport scape, right? Sometimes it's shocking, honestly, the way people transform, and not always for the better. So sometimes the emotion gets the best of us, and it creates this charged scenario where that balance and that sense of open-mindedness disappears. And then the last one is that everyone's got a unique personality and needs and different motivational profiles. And that might mean that they communicate differently and they have a different way of giving and receiving feedback, maybe super blunt, for example, or they're from a culture where it's very, they're used to having these hierarchies. And actually, they feel very uncomfortable with disrupting that power imbalance because that is the honor-based culture that they were raised in. And the opposite can be true. So it can be a very tricky business. How do we balance the power? How do we give skills to everyone in sport? That includes sport parents, that includes volunteers, that includes officials and coaches, and of course that means the athletes. How do we learn to self-regulate better so that when we're in those emotionally charged environments, we can be more mindful of the way we communicate? And then how do we create a more diverse, inclusive space where we're mindful of cultural differences, for example, and personality differences? So it's a tall order. It's not super easy, but it's something that we need to start talking about, because I think if we do this, we're going to start creating more of a curious environment where we're learning about each other instead of judging, jumping to conclusions, and creating more of a closed off environment. So on this slide, we're going to talk for a second. I want you to think about your club right now and the program that you operate within. I know we probably have some parents that are going to be listening to this. Some of those parents might be coaches as well. We likely have some athletes. Maybe we've got some officials listening. Maybe we have some volunteers or sport leaders that are on boards of directors of their local club, for example. Think about who has the role in being the gatekeeper of creating psychologically safe environments. That includes on the board level when you're having a board meeting and you're discussing very highly charged issues like team selection, for example, right? Is that the kind of environment? Is it optimal? Is there something that could be improved in that environment at the board level? If you're in the team setting, if you're a coach, what kind of messages have you been sending, or have you been mindful of how we create those kind of spaces where athletes feel empowered? And we're going to talk a little bit later about speaking up. Okay. And second paragraph here, within the athletes, there likely is a hierarchy as well. So you've got athletes that have more power for a variety of reasons, personality issues, or traits. Could be their really well-known last name in the community, right? All kinds of reasons why you might have some imbalances within athletes. So you got to be thinking about, how am I enhancing peer leadership and ensuring that we're avoiding behaviors like bullying, for example, singling out people? Are we modeling the kind of communication skills that are required in order to create that psychological safety? So it's important to teach young people how to give and receive feedback in a respectful way. It isn't just the message, it's how we give the message that's all included in this idea of psychological safety. So when I'm doing work with some teams, we'll go through different exercises where they might take turns active listening. They'll pick some topics, and then you'll pair up. You might have a couple coaches, or a coach and an athlete, or two athletes, and you go around the room and you discuss particular topics. Everyone's discussing the same thing, but you're doing it one-on-one. And pick a challenging topic and model back and forth, giving and receiving that information where there's no wrong answers, there's no dumb questions. How do you do that with respect? And what did that feel like to be very mindful of that and to be mindful of your differences? So that's one exercise you can do with a team. I was thinking, Emma, this might make a great sheet that I should perhaps add to the tools and resources as well. Just as I was creating this webinar, it's coming up with more resource ideas. But when we're creating psychological safety, it can really be helpful to have a few catchphrases or a way of speaking so that you know how to diffuse some of these more charged environments or situations. So here are a few just common psychologically safe approaches to manage what we typically see, whether we're in a board meeting or we're in a team meeting, and maybe there's some conflict, right? So someone saying, wow, these are complicated issues and things keep changing. You're right, like acknowledge that you came in with a game plan, or you came in with saying something. Things are changing all the time. It's complicated. You're right, like this isn't black and white. Let's open up the door that, yeah, this is up for discussion, right? Create that space. We're all trying our best, but there's going to be mistakes made. And it's really powerful if a team leader or a coach even admits that they too have made one. And you may have just made one just then, right? That tactic that I chose may not have been the right call. I didn't anticipate, what we were up against today. You're right. So modeling, assuming responsibility and acknowledging mistakes as well. That way you're saying mistakes are allowed, right? And they're to be expected. In fact, that's how we learn and we grow. Tell them you appreciate bringing up a hard topic, right? That must have been difficult. That can't have been easy, bringing that to me. Thank you. Appreciate it. So hearing that from a coach, that changes the world for a young person. A young person bringing that up to their parent, to a leader, where there's an imbalance in power and it is acknowledged, that is so affirming. That could change someone's life in a positive way, and it definitely will change your relationship, right? That's how you build trust. So some of these, and you can just take a look at the other ones at your leisure here. Another one is about just getting more feedback. Now, if you see nonverbal feedback in the room, that person in the back is the introvert. I know them. They tend to not speak up, but their facial expression and their body language, I can tell there's something going on in there. I'm going to give them the floor. If you feel like you really want to encourage that, and they may not speak up, but show them that it matters to you, right? It matters to you because they look concerned and they're not still fully convinced. So bring them into the conversation, and it's okay if they don't feel comfortable. That's all right too. But by pointing it out, that can open the door. And then you might have the kind of team where you have 2 or 3 board members or coaches or athletes or whoever it is who tend to take up all the oxygen. So one way you want to acknowledge, it's great when we've got extroverts and we've got people that are really chatty. That's awesome. That's one view, really important. Awesome. Thanks for sharing. What are some other things we haven't considered? Right? Because like this is the problem, is we get into groupthink, which is where you have a group of people and you tend to want to go towards harmony. So you end up gravitating towards whoever has the loudest voice, right? The best lawyer. But that doesn't mean it's the best decision. In fact, that's the cool thing about being part of a team, is that you get way more heads. They're better than one. But we got to create an environment where every head feels like they have a choice and they have input, right? So these are just some different techniques, and I'm going to create a tool which will illustrate each of these different points and how that can enhance a conversation, a conflict solving scenario, etc. So those are some of the sort of practical tips in introducing this idea of what psychological safety is. Got you thinking about it. Hopefully you're doing a bit of an internal audit on, okay, where could I potentially improve on some of that stuff? What are some things I could do? But now I want to hand it over to our ambassadors and see if any of them want to share a scenario, or it could just be something that they've learned through their experience as a player or even post competition about creating psychologically safe spaces where people feel free to exchange and raise their voice on these types of things. Anyone want to jump in?
I can start.
Okay. Thanks,
Right.
Derek.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I first saw this question, it reminded me of a very distinct memory from my first year in university. And I think it was, it was a very tough time. It was your first year university away from home in this unfamiliar place, kind of on this unfamiliar team where everybody kind of knows each other. And I was feeling, a little bit uncertain about where my spot was. Where do I kind of fit in this team? And it was on our kind of one of our first road trips, sort of a exhibition weekend, and we were doing some team building stuff. And so it was away from the court. And I think that was like a really important piece of this, but it was basically just an opportunity for everybody to chime in terms of what they wanted this team to be about, what they wanted this to be an opportunity to explore in terms of, as much as there's a coach who's got this idea of what the team is, it's also a recognition that it's not his team, it's our team. And I think that conversation, it started off with sort of people branching out a little bit into smaller groups where, it's kind of like not one person sharing with another, 18 other people or whatever, but an opportunity to start small and then to kind of bring that to go collectively together. And I just remember feeling so at ease in that. I felt like it was people were very understanding and very curious to understand what I was wanting to share, even though I was this rookie on the team, even though I was kind of this young guy who, sometimes there can be that feeling of who am I to like say what this team should be about. But I felt so supported in that. And I think as I'm reflecting on just, I didn't think about it now, but as I think about it kind of in this stage, that I think what was really helpful was that this conversation was happening away from those intense emotions, away from kind of the charged up experience that comes up on the court. Because I think sometimes looking back now, we can have moments where we want to say like, hey, this is what we want to do as a team. And it's in the middle of an intense practice. And it's like, is that actually going to get through? Is that the time to sort of have those conversations about culture and about what this team is about? Or can we have those more slowed down spaces where it's like, hey, it's okay to like talk about this now, so that we have those things that we can turn to as a team in those pressure moments. So I really like what you shared there with those kind of phrases and things that we can think about. And those can be part of like the conversation as a team. And I remember one of the things I shared became like a really foundational thing for the team that year. It was around trust, and it was around how that's like a fundamental piece of volleyball. And I felt very like heard and seen in that. And so it was really cool to have that. And so, yeah, that was a really, really meaningful thing for me. And I think my coaches and my teammates did a good job of facilitating that. And so, yeah, that was a big one for me.
I love that. So everybody listening, take note, do that. No big deal. Just do that. Yeah, that's an awesome, really concrete example. Love that. Do we have maybe one more ambassador input? Either you have anything you want to talk about with this, Shanice or Kyla?
I always have a lot of things to say. A lot of examples. Unfortunately, I have a lot of like negative experiences in this regard as well. And I should preface, if you hear or see my husband running around or my child beside me squawk, I apologize for that. Just balancing the ambassador and mom life currently. But yeah, in regards to the psychological safety, I think yeah, Derek's points are amazing. And I think what Shaunna had said is really having that freedom to give your opinion without knowing that or thinking that there's going to be backlash. And whether that's having a conversation with the coach, like, okay, if I bring this up to the coach here, during this meeting, like, are they going to take it poorly, and like, am I going to get benched, or is this going to affect any kind of playing time? Like, that's, you know, always going through a player's mind. So just making sure, like, for coaches and for people in that space, just, of course, making sure that that is not a thing. That's usually just a pretty easy thing to start on, understanding that lots of people have different needs, different wants and desires. And so how can you create a culture that's going to, that how they're going to, you know, thrive in that environment, all of these different people. I think that captains and leaders have a really critical role in this as well. I've been on teams where I have been one of those captains and the leaders, and our coach hasn't provided a psychologically safe space. So as a leader on the team, and again, whether you are wearing the captain bar or you're just going to be one of those players that, you know, can support others, I always found that having my relationships with my different teammates was also crucial in trying to create at least the safe space within our player group. So that would be, you know, if someone has a hard practice, if someone was reprimanded for something that they said, or any kind of thing where you can, as Shaunna said, you can read those nonverbal cues. I would always check in with those players after the practice or a couple days later after a game, whatever it is, to see if there was something that I could do as a captain or as a leader, or what the team could do as well. So again, if that isn't coming from a top down place, that's just sometimes, unfortunately, what happens, and not all teams have that psychological safety. But how can you as a team, as a leader, create that within your team, if that makes sense?
Yeah, that's a really great point. So Derek's focused on where a coach already kind of got it, you know, and created that and extended that to the players. And in your case, sometimes it had to be player driven because it wasn't necessarily the coach that got it, right? Yeah. You've got to self-advocate, create that peer leadership and peer support. That is awesome. So thanks to both of you. And I hope everybody, you know, is thinking about that in their own program. You know, does some of this echo into either things you've already experienced, or something that you already kind of know in your gut you want to remediate in your club? This is something we'd like to see shift, right? So awesome. So that's sort of, you know, concept number one, psychological safety. Think about what it means. What's the definition? Start using that term. Start thinking about that in your coach education. Find out more about it. In your athlete education, find out more about it. And in your leadership style as a board member or as a sport parent who's supporting and volunteering, right? So the second piece is this concept of culture. Now, this is a big one. This is big overarching. This is big macro. It's outside the psychological safety. It's everything. This is kind of the unspoken. It's like the water that you're swimming in and the air that you're breathing. That is your culture. So it is a combo, like this saying says. It's a combo of what you create, but it's also what you choose to allow. So it's the behaviors you choose to allow and the ones that you consciously create, right? And sometimes they're unconsciously created too. So we have to be very mindful of that when we're sometimes on the outside looking in, and we can see a colleague, or we're coaching one team and we see another team within our own club behaving a certain way. You know, I think it's incumbent on us to have those difficult but courageous conversations when we're seeing elements of sport culture that do not fit our value code, right? So this is where we're at in 2024, is we're trying to think about these bigger questions. And I think it's fantastic. Like, the sport of volleyball is a perfect sport to take this on, because it is such an ultimate team sport when it's played with this spirit, right? So what is sport culture? It's that expression of our values, right? But what are values? They are attitudes, there are goals, right? It's the way we compete. It's the way we build relationships. It is way more, to me, it's as important, right, as anything else, but it really tends to dictate and influence all kinds of functioning. How we end up leaving sport is not just because of sport, it's because of culture, right? So do we leave in one piece stronger and optimistic? Or do we not? Or are there scars? And what does that look like? And I know, just speaking personally from my experience, Emma and I are both field hockey alumni and continue to coach and maybe in her case to play. Sometimes I pick up a stick, but of many of the sports I participated in, some of them left some really indelible positive legacies, 100% flowing in me, no question. But there are definitely some other challenging parts of culture too. And these are the things I feel very passionate about building and transforming in the latter part of my life, post playing career. So what is it, right? What is the culture? Think about it. What are the norms of acceptable behavior? So some of them are going to be very explicit. They're the ones that you see that are up, that are posted on the hockey. You walk in the rink and you've got the City of Burnaby codes of conduct, right? In minor hockey, you got them written up there. They're right there for everyone to see. And then there are the ones that are implicit. They're the ones that we see in the actual behavior, but they're unspoken, right? And we need to convey that to our membership. We need to figure out, well, what are those norms? What will we accept? What is important? What is our underlying value code? And what does that show up as in terms of a behavior code, right? So the words that we use and put on a wall, that's all great. That's very explicit, but that is the tip of the iceberg of how you create sport culture, right? It is by far, it is maybe a mixing pot in which you put the concrete to pour the foundation, but it is not the be all end all. What else is important? Well, the way that we manage the environment and the way, again, this really ties into psychologically safe spaces, the more autonomy supportive an environment we can possibly make it. And that is where the participants, whether it's the board meeting or athletes on a court, they feel authentic and they feel like they are part of the creation. They have a voice. They are independent. They can actually affect change. And they believe that, and they've been given proof to believe that. So autonomy supportive is on the far end of one end of a continuum of behavior, and extremely controlling environments would be on the very far other end. So when you have someone, if you can think of maybe a coach you've had, whether it's in volleyball or other sports, that people under their breath called maybe a dictator, this coach knew what they were doing and it was my way or the highway, right? Those tend to be on the more controlling end, or we say autocratic end of coaching style. And there might be a time, especially when we're a lot younger and things are pretty wild, your kids, and it's like herding cats. Okay. There are times for safety reasons and because you're teaching brand new skills and you're teaching rules. Hey, everybody, let's all come together. Okay. It's anarchy here in a 5-year-old volleyball, right? It's fun league. We know that there's differing attention spans and all that, and we have to have a certain amount of control, especially when we're acquiring new skills or when certain ages and stages. But the older we get and the more skilled we become, the more we want to see those coaching behaviors slide over into autonomy supportive, where now the athletes get to have a say in some of the warm-up activities. They might even help with a practice plan. They might even take turns being the coach from time to time. They might even take an officials course so that they know the rules and take turns officiating a scrimmage, for example. And the more that we empower athletes, because that's really all autonomy support is about, it's about empowerment. Frankly, it can make your job a heck of a lot easier as a coach, because now you've got this real give and take and this caring environment, but also you've still got control, because the athlete, there's a mutual respect there. But it takes time to build. So most of the studies that have been looking across martial arts, team sports, racing sports, artistically judged sports, interestingly, all say the same thing, that more transformational approaches, autonomy supportive approaches, seem to have the best retention rates. They seem to have a better sense of self and positive reviews at the end of the year when you do those questionnaires. What was your experience like? Way better self-report from the users. And the definition of success is broader. It isn't just about standings. It's about, like, our family has a blast being in this club. My kid feels better about him or herself by the end of the season being on this team, right? So success is a wider scope. It isn't just about outcomes. And so if we think about that idea of fewer controlling behaviors, more autonomy supportive behaviors, we can see from this model here, this is from a type of a theory called self-determination theory. Actually, one of my, I guess you could say, he's a hero of mine in sports psychology at the University of British Columbia, coined this idea of self-determination, and competency, autonomy, and being related or being connected. These three elements on any team that is deemed to be high functioning and well-being centered tends to last longer, play better together, have better cohesion. But it's tough. It's tough to get there. It takes a lot of work, but being mindful of, and I want you to think about this again, personal reflection moment. How autonomy supportive is my environment? How do I engage the athletes in making them feel like they have a stake in things? Or on my board of directors, do I make sure that everybody's strengths are being acknowledged? Does everyone feel like they have skills and they're actually applying them to our club? Okay, so how autonomy supportive are you? Are people getting better? Do they have a sense of their competency improving? How are my technical skills as a coach? Am I upping that competency feeling in those athletes? Because they really need that too for self-determination theory. They need to feel autonomous, they need to feel competent, but they also need to feel related and like they're positive relationships. Those three pieces are the most important in SDT or self-determination theory. So give that some thought on how we can enhance those three. And I think you're going to find at the center of all of that is hopefully a really high performing and very positive team environment. Another thing that a lot of teams like to do, and many do this in the preseason or early on, Derek talked about this, they like to figure out, well, what do we stand for? Like, what's important to us? Some of the modern day pop psychology thinkers like to talk about, what is your why, right? And I don't say that in a disparaging way. I actually believe that's really, really important. We need to understand why we are here. Why volleyball? Why this club? Why this team, right? What do we value? And it can't, Derek mentioned this as well, it can't be imposed on you by the coach. I think if you really want to have the impact, it's the team that has to decide the values. And you might want to have a values-oriented session. So have a chat like Derek did, away from the field of play, get to know the teammates, have a real, honest, authentic exchange of ideas. What's important to you? What do you stand for? What kind of family are you from? What culture are you from? Bring in all those particularities. It's fun to exchange that stuff. And here are three different ideas. If you want to think about building that culture and getting to the bottom of what you stand for, you could do a values session. There's lots, you could just Google it online and you can print out, a bunch of values. And you start out, you might have a list of 50 of them, right? And you get your team into groups where you finally narrow it down, and you might even do this democratically, like it's an election, and you host a vote and you boil it down to your top 6, right? What are the 6 that we can agree on? And so you start with that, and you might be able, you can have some fun with that. You could hold little contests. You could act out what do those values look like or feel like. And maybe some of you have even done a values session before. But you don't stop there. It's not just the values. What do each of those values look like in a practice? What do each of those values look like for our club in the course of a board meeting, right? If we value openness and contribution, what does that look like? What does that mean then? I don't want a word on a wall. I want, like, what does that specifically mean that you need to do as a program, right? And that's where the code comes in, or the conduct. explicit behaviors. What do you expect, right? What does that feel like? What does that look like? And then you might also want to follow it up, because this is the missing piece that they do not have, right? Is the accountability framework. Okay, but what if we don't stick to the code? What if we find out that some of the players are making fun or full on bullying some of the players on the team? Do we have a process to manage antisocial behavior? Especially in youth, where they may not have had a lot of modeling or understanding about their behaviors and how to even stop it, right? So do we want to bring in some intervention? There's so many groups and a lot of great resources online, books. There are even experts that you can have to come in. Some colleges and universities offer community outreach to come in and do workshops with your team. Other programs like Buddy Check for Jesse. And I think, Emma, was it Buddy Check last season that you had come out?
We
Yeah.
did, and we will be doing it again this year at some point.
Right. So just talking about having like a peer leadership program where you have peers checking in on each other and checking the mental health and welfare of their teammates on the team. So what could that look like for you? I noticed there's something in the chat. Oh, that was just you. Okay, good. Okay, just checking. So some of these things, so value session, team behavior code, and maybe coming up with that accountability framework. And it's super powerful if the athletes come up with some of that accountability framework, right? Because nobody wants sort of the parental tisk finger point. You're going to get, detention, right? It's like, what can we agree on is going to be the way that we restore harmony on the team if something goes sideways. So it isn't about punishing people. It's about encouraging them to do the right thing. But if they slip, because they will, because we're going to screw up, because we're human, right? What are we going to do with compassion, but with firm accountability that show, hey, we agreed to this. Now let's make it better. Let's fix it. How do we fix it, right? So doing that together as a group. And now I'm just wondering about with ambassadors, like culture's a big one, but I know that all of you have had different types of cultural experiences, and feel free to share. Like sometimes they were great and sometimes they were super challenging. So who would like to start?
I can start.
Hey, great.
Yeah, I think I've had a pretty unique sporting experience in the sense that I've played indoor volleyball to the highest level, and I've also played beach volleyball to the highest level, which are two totally different sports, even though it's within the same sport. And so for me, like a positive team culture, and Kyla and I played at university together. So I think we had a really great experience when we went through those 4 years together. Our positive team culture looked like that autonomy piece that you're talking about, where everyone had a voice, where, the coach created an environment where we could, I don't want to say do what we want all the time, but we could be creative in how we approach training. And we had like a small leadership team. And so there was a lot of value of our voices as athletes. And it just was a really wonderful experience. Versus on the beach, you obviously only play with one partner. And within like our national program, there were many small teams within a big team, which created some really challenging dynamics in the sense that every small team was kind of after things for themselves. But you're still representing a big team, which, makes sense with what the sport was, but it just created this environment where it was all about like me, or we in the sense of like me and my partner. I don't really care what I need to do to help us succeed. And I just found that to be something that was completely different from what I had known the 10 years prior playing indoor volleyball. And it just created a little bit of a negative experience for me while trying to pursue high performance.
Thanks for that, Shanice. Yeah, like looking at two really different experiences, and both of them probably help shape you, and you learned a lot from them, right? So I think it's important that we talk about the times when things were really positive, but also where we could have potentially had something improve right? And take some of those lessons. So thank you for bringing that up and sharing that. Do you have anything else also? Either, I don't know if Kyla or Derek?
Well, I heard from that, Shanice, that everyone should play indoor volleyball.
Uh-oh, we're gonna have a whole bunch of calls from beach now. Great.
Yeah, exactly.
Great.
They are definitely different sports. I should never play beach in my life. That's for sure. Yeah, just piggybacking on what Shanice said, for sure, we had such a positive experience. Both of us won 5 national championships in a row at UBC. So it is easy for people to say that, it was easy for us, but each year was just incredibly challenging, looked so different. And we had to put in the same level of effort from that first time that we won to probably the last time that Shanice won. I think that the buy-in that Doug created in the culture, and that, again, Shaunna, what you had said, we, went through like what we want our culture to look like, what we want practices to look like, how mapping out what the year is going to look like and how we're going to reach our goals. If we don't do that, what's the next step? How we're going to support one another? What does everybody need from one another? Like, we really did kind of a detailed analysis on the team and made it very clear that just because we had success last year, doesn't mean that's going to happen again this year with, different seniors, different rookies. Like, it's just completely different. So kind of starting from the ground up was super important for us, and having an athlete voice, again, whether you're a fifth year, whether you're a rookie, as kind of Derek had mentioned too, was like imperative. And within that, I actually put a lot of our success on the fact that every single teammate was bought in to the idea of what we were wanting to do that year, and also their role. There was phenomenal leaders on our team throughout those years that, didn't play that much on the court, but they were always supporting someone else on the team, a few members on the team. And again, kind of what I had shared last time, just making sure and doing check-ins with people off the court and being that positive light. I think that is another thing, that if you're able to get your players to buy in and really own their role, which is unique and individual to everyone, that just, again, can like improve culture astronomically. Instead of having people you can see, again, read the body language of the people that aren't playing, and you can really easily have that rift between the starters and the non-starters. So that was, I think, a huge key for us. And I continue to bring that up to this day, is just how everyone was really bought in to what they wanted to achieve and like really owning their role and being proud of that.
I love that. Yeah, rules, like being clear on what it is, but also accepting it, right? Like accepting it.
And it's definitely not always easy, but
no, and sometimes we don't really want to accept it. But when I say accept it, it's more like you kind of go, this has to be, it's not
and
ideal.
How can I make the best of it? And
how can I make the best of it? Yeah. Like, it might not be exactly what you were envisioning, but sometimes being that positive and very like powerful leader in a support role is exactly the best thing that you could do in that moment, given that you can't change your role necessarily. So I love that. I don't know, Derek, maybe do you have something burning right now, or do you want to contribute on the next one? You can contribute now too, though, if you've got
No, actually, I honestly, Kyla took the words out of my mouth. The whole role piece was something, and so she said it better than I could, so I'll leave it there.
Okay, that's awesome. So lots of great ideas. All right. So again, anyone who's listening, whether you're in a coach's role or a parent role or an athlete role, whatever it is, or an official, watching the culture all around you, helping to moderate the culture as an official, thinking about culture building. So what does that look like? How do we get our values across? How do we set goals? How do we create roles that players can buy into? Even if they don't super love their role, they learn to accept it and contribute through it. So I love that last point by Kyla also. So third piece is communicating, and not just communicating to understand. I think if we use these words all the time, whenever we're communicating to understand, not just to like throw something at someone and let ourselves be heard. We actually are hoping there's going to be a meaningful exchange there. And when we walk away from this, I will understand more about them. They will understand more about me. Doesn't mean I will agree with everything they say or do, and vice versa, but I will understand them more. Okay. And if that is our goal, and we follow some of what we're about to talk about, I think then we've hit the goal, right? So it's the base of everything, I think, how we're able to communicate and share and put energy back and forth between one another. That's really the crux of, I think, humanity. So we've got verbal, we've got the words we choose, we've got the tone that we use, we've got the body language and all the ways that we communicate non-verbally. And then there's, I just call it the energy. You know, where you just walk in the room, you haven't even seen anybody yet, but it's like, whoa, what is the energy in this room? Many a boardroom I've walked into and thought, whoa, I don't know if I want to walk in here. So there's energy exchange too, right? That's all part of communication. It's often tied in with nonverbal, but it's there too. So part of the toolkit that we have in this mental health strategy and plan with Volleyball BC is having some pointers on how you can improve your active listening or your empathetic listening skills. So how you can be a better listener, listen more deeply, reduce things like stigma. So you're opening up the door for people to talk about what they really want to say instead of what they think you want to hear, right? So those I'm not going to get into tonight because they're pretty explicit, and I think we've written them in language that anyone can understand. And there's even some actions at the end of the worksheet on what you can do as a club or a program on how to improve that. So make sure you take a look at those. But if we've created a psychologically safe space and we know what the team values are, and we know what the norms are, what we're going to tolerate and what we're not, then we're more likely to speak up, right? It all makes sense. It all kind of weaves together. Okay, so we're kind of building the culture. It's based on our values. We understand the norms and behaviors. We understand our accountability framework, and we're going to be hopefully open-minded communicators. Now we're feeling like we actually have space to speak, right? And we're really going to understand our teammates better. We're going to understand our coach, the volunteers, the parents that put in countless hours. So in a perfect world, this all works just so beautifully. But of course, we know it doesn't always work that way. And we're going to face some really difficult conversations. Sport is fraught with politics, right? We can't escape it. Politics are everywhere. It's fraught with rivalries. It's fraught with disappointment and very powerful emotions, like I mentioned right off the top. Sometimes the passion takes over and we do things that we wouldn't do in other settings, right? Because of sport, in a beautiful way, but also sometimes in a kind of ugly way when we're at our worst. So we aren't really willing to tolerate that as much anymore in 2024. I wish I could tell you that in the 80s and 90s, everything played out exactly as I wanted it to be. And maybe Emma, you can relate to this too. The 90s, like some of the stuff that was normalized, in our training environments and in competition, I just shake my head today. But a lot has changed. And I'm hoping that this will be part of that revolution and renovation, if you will, of the sector. So we want to encourage mental health and welfare. If we want to do that, we have to be thinking about giving people a voice to say when they think, this doesn't sit well with me anymore, I won't tolerate this anymore, right? Or I think this needs to shift, right? We're all good people here. Why are we still behaving like this? Something needs to shift. So let's put our common sense on and our common humanity and start addressing this stuff. So if we're going to create self-advocacy, whether that's in an athlete or maybe it's in a newcomer to a program, it's a brand new coach with very little experience working among some very experienced, long-standing coaches that have a lot of power, right? There's an imbalance. How do we have, I call them performance conversations. So they're difficult conversations that have to do with, it could be team dynamics, it could be actual outcomes in performance. So like technique, tactics, etc. Someone's attitude, you know, the way that they're presenting, right? We still have to have, excuse me, performance conversations, especially the higher we go in sport and the more performance is under the microscope, the more we're going to have to start having these performance conversations. So we can still be honest and the topics can still be difficult, but they can be done with language and with compassion and with mutual respect, right? And this is the shift that I'd like to see happen. And it's the shift in which, for myself working in this area where I'm working a lot one-on-one or I'm working with teams, it's something that I had a lot of training in, and I almost had to deprogram some of the tendencies of the bluntness, or maybe not necessarily the type of language that I would have ideally been exposed to as a player. And as I transitioned into sports psychology, I realized, wow, there's another way. There's another way that we can have these conversations. So one thing we know, we're dealing with passion, especially when we're on the field of play. We're dealing with passion. All right. And passion is just a bit of a smokescreen for anger, highly competitiveness, ego-centered sometimes. But sometimes passion comes from a very pure place in the heart too, like a true desire to succeed and to achieve amazing things. So it doesn't always come from a dark place. But one way that we can try to get that point across in a performance conversation, say you've got two athletes, maybe it's even two beach players, Kyla. I know you're never going to play beach, but maybe it's between two beach players or two teams, right? Two training, sparring partners, where you're in the heat of the moment, right? And many of you probably have heard of the sandwich technique. We teach this a lot in National Coaching Certification Program. You give a compliment, then you do the tweak, then you follow it up with a compliment. Well, it's hard to do when you're like in field play and you've got like 2 seconds to get an idea across to your teammate. Like you don't have time to sandwich it, right? So instead, it's more like ahead of time, or as you're stepping on the field of play, or as you're doing that exchange, you're letting them know, like, the reason that I'm giving you this tough message right now is because I respect you and I need you. Like, I need you. Like, we're a team, we're in this together, but you've got to be there. That's a space where, you know, that was your ball. Was that your ball? Help me out here. Whose ball was that? Right? Like, so just get to the core of the issue, clarify the intent before. I want us to be on the same team. What should we do differently? What happened there? Instead of, once again, you weren't where you needed to be. Right? It sounds simple, but in the moment, it's very challenging to have that performance conversation with that kind of integrity and maybe a little bit of compassion for how that person's going to receive the message. So we got to rehearse this stuff. We got to practice it. We got to practice it sometimes when we're in a calmer state, when it becomes part of our lexicon or our language. And the more that we practice it in a calm state, maybe in a training setting, in a scrimmage, the more that will start to come through. If we apply a bit of pressure to the scenario, it becomes a habit. The same way why we want to practice under pressure, sometimes in training environment, because we want to practice how we play. So we want to talk and communicate how we're also going to talk and communicate when we're under pressure, right? So clarify the intention. The intention is, I respect you. We're on the same team. Let's do this. What needs to change? You know, you could ask in a form of a question so they're not so defensive, right? Go for solutions. Another just easy way to remember is the acronym of WIN. So name the situation or the behavior really clearly. The behavior that doesn't sit well with you, for example, I feel, so let them know, how did it land with you? Why don't you agree with it, right? Because it made me feel this way, you know, uncomfortable, disrespected, confused, frustrated. Let them know how it made you feel. I need you to, or in my eyes, you know, I need this. And then you step back and you give them the opportunity to respond, right? And see how that lands with them. So it isn't done adversarially. It isn't done with fingers pointing. It's telling your truth. You're not speaking for anyone else but you, right? When I feel, I need. So finding solutions, right? It isn't about just throwing out insults or hurt. So be as specific as you can. It's a learning conversation, right? It's not an argument. It's not a fight. It's not chastising someone or being a critic. It's a learning conversation. It's a performance conversation, right? Describe it. Try not to do things like you always or you never, because let's face it, no one always does anything. No one never does everything, never, ever, right? Like those are exaggerations. And of course, we want to avoid things like name calling or putting the person down, not respectful, that kind of thing. They need to know what you want, right? So what do you want? Figure that out first, and then get to the crux of that. So I've just got some examples here, and I think I might want to include this all in the same resource, Emma, that I was thinking about earlier when we were talking about psychologically safe spaces. We might want to have the win approach as well on that worksheet. So giving some example of athlete to coach. You know, when you tell me to try harder or you yell at me, I feel frustrated because I don't know what I'm doing wrong. You know, if we're just yelling, try harder, you know, or focus, like on what, you know, like you don't know, right? So let them know, I need you to show me or explain it again. Can we try that? Like, I want to please you. Most athletes want to please their coach, right? This is very, very hard, this first one, because there is an imbalance of power that we alluded to earlier, right? So this takes a lot. It's a lot to ask a 12-year-old to tell a grown adult that, especially under duress when they are hurting. But it's a brave child who's potentially been parented or maybe has the kind of team environment where they feel safe to do so. Who knows? Or if they don't, maybe they can share it with a teammate, or it's up to the adults in the surroundings, other parents, manager, maybe a co-coach, to step in and observe how they're reacting to that forceful language or raised voice. That child does not respond to that. In fact, most children don't, right? So that's the example. And then athlete to parent, you know, I'm not going to tell everybody how to parent their kids. I know how hard the job is. I have 3 of my own. And they're the best work of my life and the most challenging work of my life at the same time, which is a beautiful thing. But, you know, saying to that parent, like when I'm late for practice, I feel embarrassed because everyone stares at me when I walk in the gym. I need to be on time, Mom. I need to be on time, Dad. Can we leave a bit earlier? Right. So they're going to practice on you. You're sort of the stomping grounds, and you are the test market for the future athlete coach relationship. And probably the coach is a parent on top of that too. A lot of times they are. So that is actually a safe place to start practicing this win approach. So encourage this. If you are a parent at home, encourage this. Encourage your kids to do this. Empower your kids to do this. You're going to have, I think it's going to really help with your relationship anyway. And then of course we want to encourage it in the athletes too. So I've given an example here about team gossip, or maybe somebody is really prone to talking about athletes the second they walk away, right? They become the topic of conversation. We got a lot of feedback about that. Emma got a lot of feedback about that from the outreach to the athletes. And when I met with the provincial teams, this is very painful. The social discord and cliques, for example. So when you talk about our teammates behind their backs when they walk away, like I get frustrated. I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's nice. Like, can we focus on some other topic that's like more interesting, or frankly, you know, another topic that I feel comfortable with? Like that takes that takes a brave kid to say that. But that is an anti-bullying behavior 101 right there, right? So how do we encourage our players to not be bystanders, to be brave, and to start to transform some of these very antisocial group dynamics that are part of, especially the teen years and the middle school years, but are extremely painful. And later, when I'm in a therapeutic environment, these are always the stories that come up. I was bullied when I was 13. Like they don't forget this stuff. It is so painful and powerful. So we owe a duty of care to young people to teach them these skills and to point it out, that they have the opportunity and the power to change that. So if we think about this idea of speaking up and advocacy and giving that torch to the athletes or whoever it is in our programs, I think it's important we hear from our ambassadors of maybe some of their thoughts about speaking up and ways we can encourage that, or maybe times they wish they'd been encouraged. I don't know who wants to start. Anyone?
Shanice does.
Shanice does.
Sure. Thanks, Kyle. I'm gonna try and like tie this together somewhat nicely. I think for the athletes that are listening, or maybe parents, if there's anything that I regret in my playing career, it's that I was not able to find and like own my voice and own the confidence in that earlier. And that's not to say that like I experienced negative things in volleyball growing up. I just wish I would have found that confidence a little bit earlier, so that, you know, if it happened to a teammate of mine, I could have advocated on their behalf, and yeah, really took that to heart back then. I was able to do something like that as an adult, and there was on one of the slides that you said earlier, something about like encouraging or applauding the people that are speaking up, how important that is and how that can change their life. That absolutely 100% is true for me in, you know, trying to stand up to systems of power and explain, you know, situations where I felt like I was wrong. And I'm like super proud that I was able to do that and be confident in that as an adult. But a lot of times when I was trying to do that to certain people, they weren't listening, or they were, you know, disregarding what I had to say. And it took just one person being like, wow, how courageous of you to do that. I hear you, I see you, I feel you. And that like meant everything to me in that moment, and was able to help me get out of something so negative. So for like any, you know, coaches, administrators, someone in positions of power, please, please, please encourage those people and like applaud their courageousness when they do choose to speak up in whatever sense of the word, because it is so important and so needed, and especially for young kids that are choosing to take those steps so early.
I love that. Thanks for sharing that, Shanice. I hope that, I know that that's going to land with a lot of people that listen to this. Kyla, do you have anything to add? I mean, she wrapped it up so nicely. Derek, also, anything you want to add here on the self-advocacy?
That's why I made Shanice go first.
Because she was going to nail it. Yeah.
The only thing that I would say, and again, I guess it would be more for the players, but I don't think there's ever been a situation where I did speak up that I know that there hasn't, that I regret it. Even if there was like awkward or hard conversations that had to follow me speaking up, or speaking up about myself, or if I was again in a captain or a leadership position representing the team. I think that, yeah, I never regret it once. So it just shows how powerful that being that person, being that voice, standing up for what you believe in, standing up for a teammate, I think can, again, if you are in that leadership position, if you can encourage people like Shanice said, I think it's just, again, it's hugely powerful. And again, kind of life-changing, as Shanice mentioned, like can propel you on a different path. So again, just encouraging that, I think, is really huge.
That's awesome. Thanks to both of you on that. Yeah, I think, you know, we could probably do a whole, that is a whole workshop, really, just the self-advocacy piece, but hopefully with some of these tools and some of this amazing input from the ambassadors too, it's got everyone just thinking, okay, what can I do in whatever role I'm in? What's the unfinished business that I can start? You know, what's the baton that I can pick up now in the role that I'm in to make sure that we encourage that self-advocacy in someone who doesn't necessarily have as much power or as much of a voice? So that brings us to the fourth and final topic that we were hoping to cover tonight. So this idea of team building or relationship building as a construct or as a process, right? So you're all kinds of different roles listening to the, and maybe you wear different hats as well. You might wear more than one hat as well. But one way that we can strengthen that cohesion is to have a systematic, but also kind of organic and holistic way that we draw those people together. And you remember back the self-determination theory, relatedness is one of the three in the trifecta of the glue that holds together that strong program that retains athletes, has a strong sense of autonomy, supportiveness, and you're improving your play, right? But the relatedness, that feeling cohesive and together, is so key. Many of you likely have done some of these more, I would say, stereotypical type of team builders. So it could be, you know, going for a dinner where you invite some of the parents in the club too, or you're on the road, you're in a varsity program, and, you know, you do the dinner as a team, and everyone gets a chance to just be you, right? And have fun and tell jokes and eat great food. You might hold special events in your club. Maybe it's a movie night. Maybe it's some kind of a retreat, a camping trip. Who knows? Everyone's all got sleepovers. I know I held countless sleepovers for my daughters and their programs they were in. Different fundraisers that might have a dual purpose. So partly to raise money, of course, but also you're building team at the same time because maybe you're doing an activity. I love the community service ones. Those are really great because they also just feel great. You're doing something, you're giving back, hopefully to other people that could really use your help. So you feel awesome because you're doing something cool and you're doing an act of service. Plus you're doing it alongside people that you care about, hopefully, and you're starting to get to know a little bit better, and it brings out your good side if we do it right. And then, you know, dances, award ceremonies, like recognition kind of stuff feels really good. Everyone gets to dress all fancy and have some fun and really celebrate the sport. That can be a fun team builder. Going and coaching. So getting some of the more experienced athletes to go and work with the littles, you know, those brand new little wild cats that are all over the place and don't even closely resemble a team at that point, but it can be really fun to coach and to do things like a school visit maybe, or other acting as special guests. Maybe some of you go as an envoy to represent your team and maybe talk to other members of the community about the power of sport, for example, and why it's so cool being part of your team. So there's a zillion things like this. And I encourage you to share those ideas. And, you know, if there are certain ones that really work for you, then if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But there might be some ideas that I'm about to bring up that are not just your run-of-the-mill team builders, but they're also meant to transform some of the cultural pieces that we're struggling with right now, I think, as a sport system. And those are some of these kinds of things. So we know that, you know, when we wear something, it's called a uniform, right? And it's called a uniform for a reason. It looks exactly the same as everybody else's, right? We want to be uniform because we're a team. In sport, we like that. We want it to be homogenous. But we're not homogenous, right? We've got diversity of all kinds in our community. And if we want everyone to feel included, like to truly feel like any culture, any walk of life, any difference is welcome on a volleyball court or on the sand, then we need to act like it. And it could be that you're going to want to have the opportunity to share actually what makes you different, not what makes you all the same. So bring some of that difference. And I know in our field hockey community, we worked really hard. Where I grew up in Ottawa, played many of my young adult years there, huge Indo-Canadian community. And the sharing of food, the sharing of music, the sharing of cultures in all of our major events from the Indo-Canadian perspective was just amazing to me. And it really changed who I am, I think, as the person in a positive way. So it could be any kinds of difference. It could be ethnocultural specificity and uniqueness, to any other aspect that makes different members of your team unique and special. Let's celebrate that. So that's one idea. Another one that I did when I was working with some clubs here in Kelowna And in fact, with UBC Okanagan, I created this box and on it, we had just had a sign. It's like random acts of awesome. And so we traveled everywhere with it. I usually brought it with me, but when I couldn't go, a team captain had it or one of the assistant coaches. And what we encouraged is it was all done anonymously. We had a bunch of cue cards that they could fill out. But if they caught somebody doing something either hilarious or just like really kind or courageous or selfless, to write it down. Don't miss that moment, right? Don't miss it. Just note it, write it down, put it in the box. And say we were gone for a travel weekend, then at the end of the weekend, we would share them all. And then one got pulled and then there was a prize or something, got a, I don't know, free Tim Hortons something. Anyway, it could be fun. You don't have to do prizes. You could just do it for its own sake because it's just cool and it's fun. So you're noticing the fun stuff. You're noticing the giving. You're noticing the positive aspects that maybe you wouldn't ordinarily draw any attention to. And usually people are a combination of embarrassed, but also kind of happy too that someone noticed. And it just encouraged more awesomeness, honestly. Like it doesn't like cause bad behavior, that's for sure. Like it was more like, okay, fine. You want to see me acting awesome? All right, I'll give you something to notice. And the next thing you knew, everyone's just, it was actually, we had a ton of fun with it. So anyway, you could try random acts of awesome. Expectation exchange can be a really cool idea. It tends to work a little bit better with older athletes, but I don't think you would have to shy away from it for younger ones. You just want to pare the language down. I think it was Kyla talked about roles, right? So everyone's going to be assigned their explicit role that they know that they're supposed to have. And then we also end up evolving into roles that maybe we didn't necessarily want, but it's kind of what we're expected to do now. It looks like I'm going to be in a supporting role. I'm not going to be a starter, or I'm striving to not to be a starter one day, but for the moment, I'm in a support position. What's the best thing that I could do with my time? And so you can have one-on-one conversations and discussions between teammates. Make sure everybody gets a chance to talk to everybody on the team. What do you expect of me? What's your expectation of me and my strengths and what I can bring? And here's what I expect of you. And you exchange that back and forth. And don't forget your coaches, right? So they've got to be part of that too. Coaches, maybe you have like a team trainer. Make sure you get everyone involved in that. And then you can even do global expectations of the team too. So that can be, it takes a while, it takes dedication, but they're very meaningful conversations. It's a very meaningful way to get to know each other and understand where you sit. So different team building activities, you might want to see them. They're not sort of this one and done, let's have a team dinner before a season starts. I'm done my team building, right? Team building is something that you're strengthening, you're working on. It's a work in progress all season long, right? It creates that holistic sort of sense of I'm part of this sort of bigger entity. And it can be a bit of a break from the training environment, et cetera. But every team has a different way of team building, whether it's an explicit exercise that they do, or it's like their daily way of doing business. And I like this particular model. To remember it's just GRIP. It's the GRIP model, where you want to make sure that you're clear on these 4 things. And if you're clear on these, it tends to lend itself to a lot more harmony on the team and people kind of understanding where they stand. So what are the goals, right? Individual and team. Create those early on, but keep revisiting them as you go, right? What are our goals for this game? What are our goals for this practice or this particular moment in the yearly training plan, right? What are the roles? So as an athlete, do I even understand the expectations of me? Do I really know what my role is? Is it evolving? Has it changed since 2 months ago? What is the coach's perspective of that? What is the coach's role, or multiple coaches involved, perhaps the management, et cetera? So does everyone get their roles? Interpersonal relationships, have we enhanced those? Have we acknowledged those? Have we acknowledged which ones need to be improved? And then lastly, okay, if we're going to have goals and we're going to have roles and we're going to have relationships, what norms are we going to accept and what norms are we going to create, right? So this grip model is kind of getting a little more strategic about the team building instead of just hoping that it happens. It's like at the onset or the end of your season this year, or you're at the beginning right now, this is the perfect time for you to be thinking about this grip model. Okay, is it time for me to get explicit about the goals and the roles? Start acknowledging and building the relationships, and what are going to be our team processes, right? So this is sort of a model. Maybe I can include that as well in some of the takeaway resources too. But I'm wondering, from our ambassador team, were there certain team builders that stand out in memory for you that were super fun, or they were a total flop? No, just kidding. You don't have to share the total flop, but there were probably a few that were just like cringe, but you don't have to share your cringe. Any team building type ideas, or I don't know, could have been an activity, could have been just a friendly exchange, doesn't have to be
Yeah.
big.
I think you covered a lot of the ones that would definitely come to mind, but one sort of concept that I really liked was sort of any sort of experience of like kind of like parallel play, where it's like sort of just thinking about, so often we get honed in on like volleyball, and that's how we play. And I think there can sometimes be value in like in practice, like what if you play like a different sport? And so like sometimes on teams we play like a version of soccer, or we play like something else. We play even like doing like beach sometimes, even it's still volleyball. It's clearly enough of a different world. So like I don't know, I just find those can be ways to kind of break from the norm of what you normally do, but ways to still kind of run in a parallel track of being on the same team or on the same people. So whether that's a sport or even going, I don't know, like laser tag or something like that, or I don't know, just like I guess my team one year we did like paintball, so that was a little more intense, but those can be like those can be really bonding experiences where you're sort of stepping away from the intensity of always doing the same sport all the time, but still working in a team oriented manner, or you're just getting to play. So
That's
that's one that comes to my mind.
I love that. I should have thrown in there too, another benefit of team building is that they're kind of burnout busters. Like they help buffer you from getting so burnt out. Because when it's just like volleyball, right? It's kind of nice to have something else. So I love that idea. Thanks, Derek.
We played games or a different sport or some kind of game on the national team for a year. It was kind of our warm up. Granted, practices were 3.5 hours, so we had time to do that. But it actually got so competitive, like more so than our practices. We were banned from playing the fun warm-up games, but if you can do it, it is really awesome. Or just outside of, but I think some of my favorite team buildings is again just being like completely away from the court, and whether that's a team meal or a activity or something like that. Again, it kind of gets people's guards down. Again, those roles are diminished and can just be friends hanging out and getting to know one another. So kind of anything off the court, I think is super helpful.
Yeah, because then you're just you're not Kyla the volleyball player anymore. Because it's the getting to the core. And I think that's also can be a really big buffer against the bullying piece. You start seeing a person as a holistic human being. You don't see them as maybe your competition on the court or this rival. You start to have more meaningful conversations when you're just being you away from the court. So I love that idea too. That's awesome. Yeah, so lots of great ideas. There's so many. I mean, again, we could do a whole session on that as well. So, but we won't. So that's up to all of you that are listening tonight. And hopefully you've got some ideas, or it's got sort of the wheels turning on some areas in these 4 specific dynamics that you might want to study up on more, or maybe start experimenting with in your environments and in your clubs. And I just wanted to do a little quick shout out too, before we leave a bit of room for questions, if there are any, that we do have 2 more that are following up. And so they're going to be at the same time slot if you want to catch them live at 6:30 p.m. One will be on February 28th, and that's on trying to create a more positive body image in sport. And then we'll wrap things up in March with self-care and well-being at 6:30. And I know, Emma, we're going to be recording all of these, right? So if people can't make them live, they can see them.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you. Great. I just loved that. Flew by that hour and a half, just hearing everything that you've got to say, Shaunna, and everything that our ambassadors have, like their insights. It's been such a pleasure. I am leaving a bit of space. I've been answering a few practical questions as we went along. So if anyone wants to ask a few last questions, now is the time. But I do want to say at this point, like a huge thank you to the 4 of you for coming online and being part of this webinar. As Shaunna said, we've got some other ones coming up, which is amazing. And we will be following up after this with a sharing of the recording and also a link to where you can find the mental health toolkit as well. And yeah, I just want to say that I hope you've all found that really inspiring, and a lot of great practical ideas about how to help build those teams in such a short period, as we all know that happens in the club season. Let me just have a quick look now. Oh, I just got a nice kudos to everybody from Chrissy. Thank you, Chrissy. Just an appreciation for the session. Great job, everyone. And also I had some other comments earlier that were sent to me about how much people were enjoying it and how much they appreciated the really practical advice that all of you are giving. So on that note, I think I'm going to finish by thanking our ambassadors, Shanice, Kyla, and Derek, and thanking you, Shaunna, for hosting another awesome session. And we look forward to seeing everyone same time next month when we'll start talking about body image. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Bring more questions next time.
Yeah.
Speak up. Psychologically safe space.
Exactly. Yes.
Awesome.
I'm seeing lots now just going, thank you. So
great.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Bye. I also just got